a very interesting one, which is also symptomatic of the geopolitical calculus, which is undergoing changes. Today's topic is very ambitiously titled Power Shifts, the Geopolitical Chessboard in a Fragmented World. And we have a very distinguished panel with us, starting with General Munir Zaman, President, Bangladesh Institute of Peace and Security Studies. We have Gregory Simmons, Associate Professor, Turibe University in Latvia. We have also Srirada Datta, Professor O.P. Jindal, Global University, India. We have Qazi Faisal bin Siraj, Country Representative, Asia Foundation, Bangladesh, and a veteran think tanker. And we also have Dr. Amna Khan, who has recently completed a PhD from Jilin University, China. Again, so as we have been already told that we have to wrap up everything by 2, so we'll cut straight to the chase. Now, one of the issues that has been on offer for analysts, and nowadays it has become a staple for common conversation, that this is the age of multipolarity. This is the age where unipolarity or the hegemony of the United States is dissipating with the rise of China and the rise of also the middle powers. So along with this as a caveat, we have President Donald Trump, whose President-elect Donald Trump, whose recent victory in the United States also raises grave questions about multilateral collaboration. And for the last 12 or 15 years, somehow in the US and also by extension in the Western narrative, China has been pointed as a strategic adversary. And thus you also have the rise of the Indo-Pacific strategy and various containment strategies. So this is just a rough background on which we will set our Q&A. So that takes us, first of all, to General Munir Zaman. And General Munir Zaman, the first question, you'll have 5 minutes. Now, as I've already discussed, when we see into the Indo-Pacific strategy, or when you see into the formation of Quad or AUKUS or various other acts, one discerns architecture which is designed to contain the rise of China. So how would you comment from a US perspective, and how does it feel for an outside observer? Sir, your comments, 5 minutes for you.
Thank you, Pervez. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk on the very important issue that we are discussing here. The center of gravity of international strategic competition has shifted to the Asia-Pacific, or Indo-Pacific now. What started off as a rebalancing act by the United States has transformed into an Indo-Pacific strategy. It started off as a strategic competition between rising powers. So the rising power challenging a status quo power, United States. Rise of China was seen by the United States as a strategic competitor. Therefore, classical to any status quo power, it challenged the rise of Chinese power. So the strategic competition that started off in the Pacific has now been transformed into a containment theory, practically. And in doing that, the United States and its allies has come up with a number of strategic initiatives. As the moderator just mentioned, it came up with the concept of Quad, where 4 countries that got together in the post-tsunami period has now turned into a security agreement with both hard and soft components, more so now in the soft components. The Quad is being taken as a pillar which will contain China's expansion of influence. It is also talked about now that the Quad will also expand. So we are now talking about Quad Plus or a Quad dialogue process in which a number of countries are vying for places in that process of expansion of Quad. We now also have a very hard security component of AUKUS, which is a trilateral between United States, UK, and Australia, primarily to construct nuclear submarines, but it is beyond that. It is a hard security component of the strategic containment of China. We also have several pillars of technological wall that the United States is building against China to contain China's expansion of technology, particularly in the fields of EV, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, robotics, and many more. And in doing that, the US wants to contain China's technological expansion as it advances in these very critical fields. It also is looking at disrupting the present status quo of supply chain management that we've got, and is trying to take out many of the production bases out of China into other countries, what is now being called as friendshoring or chefshoring. In that, many countries in Asia, particularly India, will be home to many of the changes in the supply chain management that the United States is now trying to build. It is also taking out many of the semiconductor capacity and chip making capacity out of China into safe shores. In safe shores could be even Bangladesh or many other smaller countries in Asia. So we have a number of strategic initiatives that the US is taking to contain China's expansion of power and influence.
Thank you, sir. Right on time, and also very precise, yet very informative. Now that, when we started off, with when we opened our salvo, with the US take on their geostrategic initiatives to contain China, now it would be only imperative that we also talk about the much neglected other half of the Western alliance, that is how Europe thinks. And I know that Europe is not a monolithic front. So again, even within Europe, when the bigger countries are there, whether it's Germany or France or the Eastern European countries who have a, what would I say, a divided legacy or contentious legacy with Russia, so their mindset regarding cooperation or contestation with China is quite different. So that takes us to our second speaker, Greg Simmons. And if you could shed some light on the evolving geopolitical dynamics in Europe as a whole and how it will be affected with the rise of Trump. So 5 minutes for you, Greg.
Okay. Well, Europe, quite frankly, is in disarray at the moment. And this is largely due to the fact that they believed what was being said in the mainstream media and the polls. The same ones who in 2016 presented Hillary Clinton was going to win. They did the same thing this time. So you had a lot of these European so-called leaders that actually helped Kamala Harris' campaign. I mean, Starmer sent over a bunch of people to help campaigning for the Democrats. You had Macron and others who were absolutely criticizing Trump and denigrating him. So this is the problem at the moment for Europe, because Europe itself is not an independent strategic actor. It acts in the interests of the United States, if we want to be blunt. And this is seen everywhere, and it doesn't matter how self-destructive the cost for doing the US bidding. I mean, we can look at the results of the Ukraine war, and the same rules-based order, as they call themselves, who absolutely enable and facilitate genocide of Palestinians and ethnic cleansing of them. So, I mean, on the outside you have all of these so-called values and norms which are absolutely not adhered to, but they like to preach and lecture others in this deeply messianic ideological way how they should behave when they do not have their own house in order. And if we look at it quite frankly, I mean, what they are doing is assisting the US geostrategic imperatives, which are outlined by Brzezinski. And these are to ensure that you have the system of vassal states, those who have some level of independence, but they are obedient and somewhat dependent on the US. And this is essentially where a lot of Europe is at the moment. Then you have the system of client states, and that is those that are physically protected by military means quite often and are obedient to the US. And in this category you can have Ukraine. And the third imperative is that there is an attempt to ensure that no rival as an individual or a collective can rise up and challenge US unipolar hegemony. And hence you're getting the disarray now, because you have the global south, which are, and it doesn't matter how much economic warfare, how much political warfare is levelled against them, and we can see that being used in this particular part of the world. For example, the amount of pressure on India. And if we look at this, the problem is that the US and Europe mostly, for that matter, they are not a continental power. They are a maritime and area power projection. And one can say that's even problematic at the moment due to a number of reasons. So what the search was probably on because they cannot confront China, if we want to put this directly, by continental means. The US Army would get slaughtered, especially in its current state.
Thank you. We would have to, for the time being, curtail this very interesting discourse that you're having. We'll follow up with this. But again, as we are facing a paucity of time, and again, we cannot keep the guests from lunch, so again, we have to rush. But we'll follow up on this idea. So that takes us to Professor Sriradha Dutt. And one of the things that has been also discussed, and because there's a common continuity over here, that when we talk about China, there's also the rise of India also. So in fact, the Asian century, China and India are two intrinsic pillars of this rise, whether we like it or not. But often India has been there, and I try to keep the question short, but I'm giving you the background. There's been quite or even triumphant celebration with Trump coming to power, but we know that India has been an integral element of the US's grand narrative. But also, we also hear that again, India follows its own strategic autonomy in terms of being part of the BRICS club, or again, having close relations with Russia and Iran. So would you want to shed some light on India's view of multilateralism and the newfangled plurilateralism, where I always stumble? Didi, on to you, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Parvez, and pleasure to be here at this conference and this panel. Yes, I think the point that India has been making is that it is a multipolar world now, and what India is following is a pluralism as we understand it. Simply put, I think what we have seen in India in the last decade, of course, the fact that it's over a 3 trillion economy today, the 5th largest economy in the world, hoping to be third in another less than a decade, also works in India's favor at this point of time. And again, as the point that was made by General Murzaman about how Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific has become a pivot of international attention, which clearly has also, generated a lot of interest in India, which is why I think everyone across the poles wants to work with India. And as we see India just now, whether it's in the neighborhood, extended neighborhood, if you look at India's Act East policy, which is ASEAN, the kind of tremendous, engagement that they've had there. And of course, as you said, and I think with US, apart from the nuclear deal breakthrough, I thought we had a fabulous breakthrough under President Biden's time of the technology transfers that we've, finally got to see what we've been demanding and requesting for a while. So, and of course, Russia has always been a steadfast friend of India, and India stood its ground on that. There's certainly a point of view on the Ukraine crisis. But if you look at the way the IMEC corridor is expanding, I mean, we are looking at connectivity across the world, not only in the neighborhood and the extended neighborhood, but across. We are looking at energy issues, constantly, of course, constantly engaging on climate change issues, and, the entire building an industry which India didn't have the scope for many years, and right now it's expanding on that. So at this point of time, of course, we are aware of the fact that the world is fragmented, there are conflicts across, but largely, and I think that has never changed for India, the ethos of cooperative framework. I mean, while it is certainly, and I think the point that he made about, US engagement with Asia and with India specifically has a bit of a anti-China, component. And I think India has always made that very nuanced differences that, yes, we are cooperating with Quad robustly on so many aspects, but I don't think India wants to position itself. It's aware of the fact it's constantly talking about the conflict that it has, the hostility at the border essentially, but China continues to be one of our main trading partners. We've done a lot of, engagement with them. The recent disengagement at the borders will certainly, I hope, keep up the momentum of a kind of a peace and cooperative framework for India. So while the world is moving at different phases, I think it is extremely apparent, and I think there's no controversy about the fact that India wants to work with everyone. Engagement, I think, is the core, and as I said, our external affairs ministers constantly talked about pluralism, which essentially means that we don't have to have a unilateral consensus about everything and anything. You are free to choose your friends, you are free to converge on specificities, and it doesn't mean, the same cut fits everyone. I think that's exactly the nuanced position that India has been taking, and I think it's been able to, and I said, of course, our economic strength, our expertise, our capacity building that we are able to do, much of that helps support our particular position.
Fantastic. And also, I'm very glad that it's ahead of time. That gives us to, again, the fourth participant over here, Mr. Faisal Siraj. And what I would like to ask you is that in this new Cold War, or this competition between China and USA, or for that matter, no matter how we'd like to frame this rivalry between China and India in South Asia, which has taken on a new hue, a new momentum. Small states in South Asia, such as Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Maldives, each have their own foreign policy challenges in how to navigate these competing pressures. So would you like to shed some light on it? Thank you. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Pervez. And it nicely coincides with the event that we had last week, and Pervez was also part of that. So we basically wanted to do a kind of thought experiment, convening in Kathmandu and allowing a few countries which we relatively consider small countries in South Asia, and to understand how they navigate the new reality, geopolitical pressures, and issues related to both economic growth and also how do they maintain their sovereignty within that geopolitical pressure that they face. And what we have found out in general is that not only the small states, in most cases, are not only surviving, they're actually thriving. And also what we have found out that sometimes we assume that they can be passive players in geopolitics and regional pressures, but we found out mostly that they're actually active players. So these are a couple of top-line findings that we had. We have also found that they tremendously have become adept in using their geopolitical locations. So for example, one may consider Nepal and Bhutan solidly in between India and China, and how they have been managing both their economic prosperity and sometimes also leveraging their geopolitical location to get the best out of the both countries. On the other extreme, we have Maldives and Sri Lanka, two countries solidly situated in the heart of Indian Ocean, and their geopolitical issues are mostly related to maritime issues. And how they, for example, within the trade route that takes place, and the leverage based on that, and how their capability has increased within that maritime framework. What we have also found out is that over the years, some countries have also enhanced their diplomatic agility, for lack of better phrasing. For example, Nepal, no, actually Maldives is a better example, where we know political parties have India and China inclinations, and how, for example, their diplomacy become agile and flexible to really take benefit of either of the power coming to power. So they don't it didn't seem like, other than in the recent events, in most cases it didn't seem like they have a solidly fixated diplomatic positioning when it comes to China and India. In terms of economic diplomacy, in Sri Lanka, for example, we know about the debt challenges. But within the debt challenges, how they're learning and how they're sort of overcoming the adversity to continue projects like Hambantota is we found it quite exemplary. In case of Bhutan, for example, while India provides them 5-year budgetary support, but they have also projects like Galefu Mindfulness City that also sort of like balances and helps them navigating against geopolitical pressure between two powers that they're currently in. In Nepal, for example, in response to India's 2015 blockade, has nicely poised them with Chinese and allowed a transit agreement to go ahead to open more trade routes looking into China. And also we have found out SAARC is the original South Asian small country multi-forum, but how over the years many has used ASEAN, BIMSTEC, IORA to really put forward there and amplifying their voices. Finally, I think what we have also found very fascinating is that how the middle powers are playing more and more prominent roles in sometimes avoiding contentious political rivalry to look into third parties and really toning down on the toxicity and not getting into trouble of political rivalry. Japan, South Korea, Australia, for example, has been often talked about, and how, for example, for technology, for maritime issues, and also for various other issues, they look up to these middle powers to avoid getting caught into geopolitical rivalry. So in that sense, Pervez, I think surprisingly we found it, even though there were dark examples, I'm not going to that, but I wanted to be more optimistic and show that how some of these smaller countries have been able to punch over their weight and being able to, again, not only survive, but thrive in a very politically divided world.
Thank you, Faisal Bhai. That was a very detailed narrative filled with reference points. And before we let our jingoistic nationalism take the better of us, I'll just like to clarify that a small states means a state which has the inability to influence its geostrategic environment. That was the definition under which we talked about, not in terms of population or economic capacity. So, and from taking from a clue from Mr. Faisal's discussion, again, the issue about debt trap diplomacy. And that takes us to the next discussant. And Amna, I would, because again, your specialization is also again in China's role in South Asia. So China's role is seen as a mixed blessing, because if you look into the Western narrative, and I must add that even mostly the Indian narrative, often debt trap diplomacy is the one that is extensively advertised. But China also plays a critical role in terms of bridging the infrastructural gap and adding much needed balance for many of the comparatively smaller South Asian nations. So how do you think that China's presence in South Asia is panning out? So if you give us a broad picture, and 5 minutes for you, Amna.
Thank you very much, Parvez. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be part of this panel. That's a very broad question. I don't know how to narrow it down. But as you know that South Asia has been and remain a protected conflict zone, and there are a lot of intra and interstate conflicts present in the region, which has made things much more complicated that it shouldn't be. So like the role of China in counterbalancing India and the other Western powers is, I would say, it has a positive contribution towards the stability of South Asia per se, because see, like all these small states, you say Nepal, Bangladesh, or like Bhutan, as you have already defined the small state, what do we mean about that? So these states always needed somebody to support them, to not be oppressed solely by the India. And on the other hand, Pakistan also, they also need somebody to stand with them. And because of all these countries' economic conditions and because of all of their economic and political instabilities, they are facing like a lot of challenges related to finance and like foreign debts. So China has always been supportive towards them. So, what makes the difference is like, when we are solely dependent on the US, we have been, as if I say that being a Pakistani, for example, like we have always seen that it has been an oppressing kind of a state, or like we have never felt that we are like equal to the Western powers, or we are like equal in terms of trade or partnerships. But when China came to the South Asia, or China like I will choose like in Pakistan, and they start developing the projects. So these states have started feel like equal. They felt like, okay, because they are doing trade instead of providing just aids and like providing development like assistance. So China has kind of given them the authority, or given them the independence to make their own like policies and everything. So of course for China, South Asia is also very much important because of their BRI and then China-Pakistan economic corridor. So there is a lot at stake for China as well. They need partners in this region, especially to counter West and to counter India. So broadly speaking, I would say that like China needs South Asia, and South Asian states also need China very much. And China has been providing a very positive role in South Asia in terms of development. You see like how much development and how much cooperation have been done, and a lot of infrastructure has been constructed, a lot of new things have come on, a lot of economic zones have been created by China. Like when for example, when Pakistan was going through worst security issues, it was under the shadow of terrorism, China was the one who came forward and trusted Pakistan and provided them, they came up with this China-Pakistan economic corridor, and they provided them like confidence when nobody given confidence to Pakistan. So I think that's because of these things, like China and the other small states, they are more positive towards China than towards India or other Western countries, because I think that's the confidence and that's the developmental projects, because these things you can see, you can find them tangible. So that's why I think these small states have more attraction towards East, and China, because China also has a lot of at stake in this region. So.
So again, we have got a different take on China, or at least again, how it's being perceived from Pakistan, at least through Amna Khan. So again, before we go on to the second round of questions, because again, often a lot of things get lost in translation, and pre-lunch hunger also gets in. So the 5 speakers over here, if I could divide it into broad themes, General Munir Zaman led us to a brief glimpse about the US strategic thinking and the various means and methods to contain China, from technology to weapons and armament, and this small encirclement of China. Greg focused light on the different geostrategic thinking in Europe and the fact that, again, Europe in itself is dependent on the US, and this dependency has come about from the Second World War and also after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. Professor Srirada Datta had actually focused on India's unique take on multilateralism, where they can exploit the best of both worlds by, again, having close strategic alliance with the West to fulfill their strategic and investment requirements while exploring newer opportunities in a multilateral world to further its own national interests. We also had Mr. Faisal, who also shed important light on the different foreign policy routes that were taken by the geostrategically smaller states in South Asia, namely Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, and the fact that they've been quite successful in containing these pressures. And last but not the least, Amna Khan from Pakistan also had come up with, again, how China in general is perceived in Pakistan, and the fact that, again, they are strategic friends, the reasons as to why this engagement has become stronger than before. So we now have, as the timer shows us, that we have 33 minutes. So the second half would be, again, probably another follow-up question. And again, feel free to answer it. And there will be 3 minutes each for them. And after this, we will open up the floor for a Q&A session. So we'll start again with General Munir Zaman. Sir, when we talk about, again, I know that when we talk about the changing geopolitical environment, no discussion is complete without China. But again, how do you see the Chinese footprint in South Asia as a whole? Feel free to answer it in whichever perspective you'd want to answer, either from a Bangladeshi perspective or from the South Asian in general. Thank you, sir. 3 minutes.
Thank you. China has a rapidly growing footprint all over South Asia. All the South Asian countries, except India, their biggest trading partner is China, including Bangladesh. Except India, most South Asian countries are also signatories to BRI. So therefore, both in terms of trade and exchanges, China has a growing footprint in South Asia. Through BRI, China also brings in much needed infrastructural support to South Asian countries. We all know that South Asia is grossly deficient in its infrastructure capacity, and therefore it is hungry for any infrastructural financing support that it can seek, and China is a ready source of providing that kind of a support to South Asia. We also know that there is no other power bigger than money. Money speaks. So China's checkbook diplomacy in South Asia has now become very effective. China is also expanding rapidly in its soft power capacity, in its people-to-people contact in South Asia. It provides large number of scholarships to young South Asian students, and therefore the cultural exchanges that happen between China and South Asian countries brings in a lot of soft power capacity that China can master in South Asia. It is also a fact and a reality that most smaller South Asian countries today are in a sense of discomfort with their relationship with India. So there, China has a ready access to exploit their situation in building closer relationship in the vacuum that India has left in South Asian neighborhood. So in all, China is a rapidly growing country in its footprint in South Asia, both in terms of soft power, economic power, trade power, and many more.
Thank you, sir. Succinctly put, and within 2 minutes. That makes my life even easier. That takes us to Greg Simmons, and for the next 3 minutes, would you kindly try to highlight that, again, as Europe, and again, Europe as a monolithic mass, we cannot emphasize on that, But Europe as a whole, how is it going to plan to navigate between, again, the US dominance and China's aspirations in the next 3 minutes, Greg?
They are already trying to navigate it, and not very well, because the US doesn't like competitors. It's the unipolar power. It does not believe in multipolarity. And so its objective is to ensure that another doesn't rise in its place. And one can see already that under Biden and so forth, they have the choice is not theirs. They were told more or less to not take up trade relations with China or to sink them. But now that you had Trump come, you can see some of these so-called European leaders crawling to China, like Germany, whose economy is an absolute mess and deindustrialized thanks to the US policy, economic warfare policy pertaining Ukraine. So this is a problem for them. They don't know how to behave because they know how they should think and act according to this globalist, liberalist agenda, but now they have someone completely different who has historically a more anti-China policy if we looked at his first term in office. So this is going to create some deep consternation for Europe. But I think, if anything, the lesson that comes out of all of this, I mean, when you have such turbulence in international relations and that there is a transformation, a geopolitical transformation taking place, which is seeing this global northern hegemony, which has existed for some 500 years, collapsing, mostly due to its own stupidity, and the rise of the global south, that it's always better to be a subject of international relations and not an object of them. Because being an object of them, especially in Asia, you'll end up being the next Ukraine to be used against China. And that's not in that country's interest, not in China's interests, only in the interests of the US.
Very bluntly put, but again with conviction. That takes us to Professor Sriradha Dutt, and again, though it's not a China theme, but you have already shed light and discussed about how India sees its role in the world. But often there has been criticism, or there has been, what would I say, there has been questions raised about that, again, India overreacting, or India basically or again going for the gun in case of China. So in terms of, there's a vision, or there's a, what would I say, let's say, from the Indian's perspective, there's a conspiracy theory, let's say, that again, India actively collaborates with the US-led Western coalition in containing China's footprint in South Asia. That is often that you hear about in the other South Asian capitals apart from India. So what is your take on this in the next 3 minutes?
It's a fact that the Chinese footprint in South Asia is very evident and obvious. But I think I'll just go back to the point that was made earlier, that I think the neighbors, South Asian neighbors, love to hate India, but at the same time, the engagement is something that you can't just ignore. Quick points about Maldives. We are aware of the fact that there's a very clear kind of a political alignment towards China, but towards India. But you've also seen when they had balance of payment problem, who did they turn to? It was India, right? And it was against China at that point of time. We had a president who took over on a very anti-India plank. But again, we've seen in the last year that there's been a convergence of interest. So clearly, I mean, while there is that particular, and I think South Asia would want to leverage both, why not? I think the point about India is that as long as our neighbors are not being, party to any anti-India activity, I think that's the main concern, and I don't think India, forget the media, they just kind of, go all over the place, and I don't think that's necessarily a true reflection of the government things. While there are certain concerns, and we've seen that with Sri Lanka also, there were concerns about how there were some elements which were being used against India. Again, when it came to the, balance of payment problem, the debt issue, it was again India, the first partner who came forth with that, 4 billion plus support. So while there are many instances, Nepal, for instance, while we keep talking about the fact that Chinese, support on infrastructure, as was made out earlier, is certainly substantial, but in Nepal, it's only been lip service so far. What have they done as yet? In fact, contrary to most, usual examples are that India takes time to deliver. India's delivery mechanism in Maldives actually has been the best. But the political divisiveness, of course, was kind of a point of there. In Nepal, whatever India has undertaken has been delivered. Unlike what China has been building this road forever. The promises are too many. There are many examples. Bangladesh, of course, is another very vivid example where both India and China has done substantial work, both infrastructure, of course, military partners, as was made out. But I would just want to go back to a point and not make it a kind of a bilateral issue here. I'm not terribly convinced that India would be called an oppressive power by any stretch of imagination. Yes, neighbors have difficulties with India. India is, and it's a work in progress, while neighborhood first is certainly a expression of political will. And I think India, but let's not forget the fact that it's beyond India's control in terms of the domestic dynamism also. While India can and has, in many ways supported, and this is not to say that I myself have not been critical of some of the positioning, but at the same time, as much as possible, Bhutan was a, perfect example that has worked and is in place despite, what were other issues. But it's a work in progress, and I think whether neighborhood first or whatever, neighborhood is an essential component of India's foreign policy trajectory, and there's no two ways about that. So clearly, but at the same time, I don't think there's any denying the fact that everybody wants to work with Chinese. I mean, there is a clear element to that.
We'll have to stop you at that again, Professor Sriradha, because again, whether India is seen as oppressive or not, I'm actually being oppressed by the time constraint. So, again, we have to move on. That takes us to Mr. Faisal Siraj, and again, moving on, how do you see that, again, you also belong to a multilateral institution also, which has been there for 70 years, and you have extensive experience in this. And how do you see multilateral institutions coming in concrete manner, in expanding the capabilities of small states to better navigate their geopolitical options? So can there be a leveraging of small states where they work with multilateral institutions, not necessarily US-dominated multilateral institutions or Chinese ones, but where can you see that collaboration coming in? Next 3 minutes for you.
In our thought leadership exercise, I think we need to be, first of all, what we mean by capability of small states. That's an open-ended question, and I think also when it comes to capacity building of a nation or group of nations, we need to be very, very careful that we don't become supply-driven, and we really need to wait for the countries to identify their needs. And if they need actually help, then I think that's the best way to collaborate. But at the same time, few things can happen. One thing that we have realized, convening of small states in South Asia is something that can happen without being overly supply-driven, and allowing them to have a platform for dialogues to really understand what are the patterns they see themselves, what are some of the innovative ways some countries are managing geopolitical pressure, and really understand from each other how to navigate the geopolitical pressures. In terms of convening, for example, as I mentioned previously, another platform of dialogue, for example, bringing in middle powers, and that have been more and more utilized by many of the small states, not only in South Asia, but also Southeast Asia. and how to really connect better the small states with the middle powers to sometimes avoid contentious political, geopolitical sidelining. At the same time, I think what is also important is that we try to not to take a side in terms of, I think, going back to my previous comment on sovereignty versus economic growth, small states are dominated by the need for economic growth and also how to interact. So there's a careful balancing, of course. But as a multilateral, I don't think we should, again, I'm re-emphasizing the fact that we should not be coming across as kind of promoting one versus another. Rather, there should be a need assessment, and through that need assessment, I think countries can share their own way forward. Another thing where I think multilaterals can, for example, organization like Asia Foundation, which has comprehensive experience with civil society organizations. So developing capacity of civil societies across the countries can be one way, and also engaging youth and future leadership in geopolitical issues, I think can be something that meaningfully can be done by us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. Very concrete examples, very helpful suggestions. And that takes us to our next discussant, and we have also 3 minutes. You did talk about, again, how, again, China has played, in general, according to the ordinary Pakistanis, a very positive role in Pakistan's development. But there's also that allegation, also the accusations that comes in from a segment of Pakistani intellectuals and analysts that previously Pakistan was characterized by an utter dependence on the US, and now that dependence has just shifted on to the Chinese. So how do you respond to that in the next 3 minutes?
Okay, thank you. Well, you know, there's always a two side of the story, and, you know, like we can't say anything in black and white. So of course, some section or some part of the country thinks that China is very much helpful, and it has played very much role in the positive image building of Pakistan and positive, like, you know, development of Pakistan. But the other, you know, part of the country thinks that no, it's not like that, and we are again getting into the debt trap. And, you know, there were many articles when Sri Lanka, when Sri Lanka dilemma has happened, there were many articles published which compared Pakistan is going to be the next Sri Lanka, and there were many articles claiming that, you know, the China-Pakistan economic corridor is going to be the next East India Company. So, you know, there are always two perspectives. So we cannot say, like, solely that, you know, the China was China, and if we solely dependent on China, so it will be the best decision for Pakistan. Of course, it's not. And if you say, like, we cannot ignore China as well, because they are our neighbor, and we already have issues with the other neighbor, the other sides of the neighbor, like Afghanistan and India. So of course, we need to have someone at our back to support us. So the thing is, like, the problem I feel that these all South Asian countries have, that they are unable to have balance of power in their relations with the other countries. So the thing is, like, like for other countries as well, like, we need to create a balance of power within our vested interests. Like, we need to know that what are our national interests and how can we attain those interests, keeping in mind not to have any kind of you know, bad relations with any country. We should not have, like, we as a region, the South Asia, I think the problematic thing is that we lack regional integration, which is the problem, and which is causing a lot of other troubles. So we should not be thinking about the, you know, the powers which are miles away from us. We should be thinking about our neighbors. We should have, like, regional integration. We should have, like, good relations with our neighboring states. we can cooperate with each other, and I think we have like enough of life competition and the conflicts. Fortunately or not, I think at the present we don't have much of the state conflict, because we as a state, like all the South Asian states right now, are so much overshadowed by their intrastate affairs and intrastate problem, like, financial crisis in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and then, there is a political turmoil as well, just a minute. So I think the regional integration should be will play more positive role as compared to leaning towards any Western or like any Eastern power.
Thank you very much. So it ends on a hopeful note and with a message to our Indian counterpart that again Pakistan is very keen on reigniting its long-lost love-hate relationship with its Indian neighbor. So again, something that you guys can work on. But why not? Why not? But that's a time where, and I think Amna has given us the cue for the next part of this exercise, is integration. So this is the time to integrate this learned audience into this exercise. So we will take 4 to 5 questions, but please, I know that you're all very knowledgeable, but usually the questions are lengthier than the answers. So that becomes very difficult. So I would humbly implore you to restrain your questions within 30 seconds, if that is possible. For us South Asians, it's very difficult, but I know you are all knowledgeable. Please get to the point so that we can accommodate as many questions and put the discussants on the spot. So we will take 5 to 6 questions. So let's go. Whoever would want this. 1, 2. All right. Okay. Okay. So who has the mic? All right. We'll start with yes. First, the gentleman over here. So the rules of the game is introduce yourself and then 30 seconds, please. Yes, the gentleman standing on the mic. Then we'll come to Ambassador Shafiullah and then we'll come to you.
Assalamu alaikum. This is retired Lieutenant Colonel Thin, Bangladesh Army. I have when we are discussing that the geopolitical chessboard in a fragmented world, I have only 2 short questions. Number 1 is, how in this fragmented world chessboard, Russia and its friends can influence? Number 1.
Good.
And number 2 is, even whoever wins or whatever the result is, whatever the result of the game is, what we are really heading or really we are heading for.
Okay, thank you, sir. Very well sequenced question. One is again role of Russia and its friends, and number 2 is whoever wins, what happens, what is the eventual outcome for the smaller states?
Yes, whoever wins.
Okay,
or
thank you,
whatever
sir.
the result, what is the...
All right, sir. I think we got it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
So can I ask a question? Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Ambassador Shafiullah, sir, again, 40 seconds for you for your question. Sir.
Yeah, thank you. My name is...
Sir, Mike. Who is the person with the mic?
My name is Mohammad Jahidul Islam. So my question is Sri Datta. So in terms of assuming the current scenario in the South Asia, do you think that actually India's neighbors first policy has failed, and why actually it's not working in South Asian region, as well as do you have any assumption about the India's neighbors first policy currently working, and regional connectivity has actually...
Please, 1 question or 2? 3 or 4 questions becomes very difficult to follow. Just focus on 1 question, please.
Yeah.
Then we can get a better answer.
What could be the possible reasons for failure of neighbors first policy in the region, and is there any possibility of such failure of strategy in the region, shifting of the power?
All right.
Thank you.
You think that India's neighborhood first policy has to a certain degree, not been successful, and what is her opinion on this? That is the broader. Ambassador Shafiullah, please. Where is Ambassador Shafiullah? Oh, you have to go to the bike. Oh, okay.
My question is very simple. In response to Srirada, I like to ask, was Hitler thought himself an oppressive power? He was rejected by the entire world. Now the question is why India, if India is not an oppressive power, why all these 7 neighboring countries rejected her? Why we could not in Bangladesh vote for 3 elections? And what the position now? So the question is, I like to know from her, they wanted our former Prime Minister, not the democracy in Bangladesh. The people of Bangladesh sent her to them. So keep
question.
Take
Just
care
the
of her.
question.
And is it a lesson for India to learn how to behave with the neighboring countries? That is my question.
Okay.
So this is my turn now.
Let us keep a check on her emotions. Again, she doesn't represent the government of India, but the questions are, I get it from where again, all right.
So this is my
Does
turn
anyone-
now. Yes,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
here and this is my turn now. Thank you. Okay.
I'll rephrase the questions. Don't worry, I'm keeping a list on them. Yes, introduce yourself in 30 seconds, please. Your question.
Okay, so I'm Mohammad Ishfaqul Kabir Asif, currently pursuing Masters in Chittagong University. So my question would be directed to any one of the panelists.
Okay.
So as we are not still sure when the election will take place in Bangladesh, how do you actually see the foreign investors investing in Bangladesh? As Dr. Monirjuman sir has already said that money talks. So how do you see foreign investors coming in Bangladesh and investing in infrastructure in the coming 6 to 1 years?
Do you see this as a direct outcome of the geopolitics, the investment?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I actually see
All
this.
right. So shall we take another few questions, or shall we give you time to answer to this? Okay, just a second. Investment and geopolitics. So again, as we have a memory of a goldfish, let me just rephrase those very interesting questions. Unfortunately, I have to be very preemptory because of paucity of time. There are 4 questions. One is the first one is very interesting, that how do you see Russia and its friends, and I presume this Iran and Venezuela and other countries, playing a role in the new geopolitical chessboard now that again Trump has come to power and his hostility towards Ukraine has gone down. That is probably the inherent implication of this question. That's number 1. Number 2 was, dear Lord, yes, another segment of this was that whoever wins in this geopolitical contestation, but what happens to the rest of the countries, the smaller states and the middle tier countries? How do they benefit, or how are they affected? That's the number 2 question. Number 3 is that again, this is a contestation, or this is a statement that India's neighborhood first policy is probably not working. And along with this, we have another question that is again, though India likes to claim that it is not an oppressive power, that is the perception amongst various South Asian countries. And there's a reference made vis-a-vis Bangladesh's context, where India's support for the previous Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has caused a degree of division between Bangladesh and India. I believe so. That was the bottom line of your question. And last but not the least is that how will changing geopolitics in Bangladesh influence, or South Asia influence, the investment pattern? Do we have another question? Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, just a very brief one.
All right, introduce yourself. That's the last question we'll take.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Islal from the Asia Foundation. So the question I had is concerning, recently because of the Ukraine war, we are seeing there's some kind of alliance between North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China. It's more of a strategic and economic consensus that they have in order to fight the war in Ukraine. But I want to know, based on the Trump administration's previous term, in some ways this region became more isolationist in the sense that
Islal, your question.
Yes, my question exactly is, do you think, based on the current geopolitical context, do you think there would be an alliance of such that will combat or try to prevent China, the US and their allies? In terms of, there has been some kind of alliance between China, North Korea for Ukraine. Will there be something like
All
that?
right. This is a follow-up of Russia and friends, and so it's an extension. Thank you. So those are some of the questions. We need to cut off the Q&A.
Sir, can I ask something, please? I was in the queue. There. Please, can I ask just one question?
You've already taken up 20 seconds, so finish it in 15 seconds, please.
My name is Fahad bin Said. I'm a reporter from Bonik Barta. My question is regarding a comment Mr. A.N.M. Munirujjaman said. The comment was the South Asian countries, most of the South Asian countries are right now in an uncomfortable situation regarding their relations with India. That's where China can take their chances to grow their hands in this region. My question is, if China grows their hands or if China improves their relationships with the South Asian countries, there is a chance in future that we will be in an uncomfortable relationship with China. So what should be the policies our governments should take to avoid such circumstances in future?
40 seconds, apologies. Feel free to answer whichever question you want, because if we don't finish in time, I'll be in an uncomfortable relationship with Mr. Zillur Rahman and CGS. So, so 40 seconds for each of them, starting with the same sequence, General Munir. Any question you'd like to answer?
The last question is that we need to balance our relationship with all major powers. That is the way to go about the game. A question that was not addressed by the moderator is a question by Chittagong University student that FDI will not come into Bangladesh unless we start with an elected government. No investor is comfortable with a temporary arrangement. They would wait till the time we have an elected government to come up with the investment in Bangladesh or make such moves. And the last point is that there is a growing China-Russia détente that is taking place, and it's a new strategic alliance that is being built with other countries like Iran, North Korea coming into the fold, and that is the kind of an axis that will perhaps counter the US stand in the Pacific and elsewhere. Thank you.
You saved me. Greg, more or any of the questions vis-a-vis especially Russia? 40 seconds for you.
Okay, well, Russia already learned in the 1990s the costs of being an object of the United States in this Western order. So in the current context, they are in the process of trying to help facilitate the rise of a multipolar order, and one which is more based on relational interactions that are pragmatically based as a counter against this messianic ideology, and this is the main point of that. Now, there was the second question, which was about will the US and the West come back? No, they have gone past the tipping point. I mean, Biden tried to talk something about retaking the US position globally, but this is not possible economically, militarily, politically, socially. The only question is how much time and how much dignity will be lost on this slide down.
Perfectly on time. Professor Sriradha, I'll give you 45 seconds because 4 of the questions were actually hinted at you. Again, no fist fights. All right, 45 seconds.
You know, I'll actually say 10 seconds and say, please read my publications, hear my interviews. I have expanded on the subject many times over. You know, I sincerely don't believe that neighborhood first is a failure. It's a work in progress. Ask any of our neighbors right now sitting in Dhaka, yes, it looks iffy. But I promise you, if I'm back a year later, we'll see the situation has changed. But at this point of time, if you look at Nepal, the kind of engagement we are doing on constantly, I mean, I don't see what is failure there. Look at Sri Lanka. Where is the failure in Sri Lanka with India? Yes, we are going through ups and downs, but that's what international relation is all about. And so I don't really consider, I mean, there is no, there is a kind of debit list, there's a credit list. It's a work in progress. I think, as I said, India's political will is clear. There are times that we don't possibly read the neighbors correctly. Yes, that's a point I agree to. So there are times that we kind of blunder on once. I mean, I can talk about the border closure, but there are plenty of things we are getting it correct. So to just focus on that and not the rest of the what we are doing in the neighborhood, which includes all the neighbors, including,
All right,
Afghanistan.
Didi.
But just one point on the Indo-Bangladesh.
Just 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we are going through a bit of a low phase, but India and Bangladesh cooperation is integral to the point that was made that integration in South Asia can only happen through this caucus, which will then become a cobweb, again a subject I've written.
Okay,
So
okay.
I would close there.
All right, thank you. We will re-explore this caucus some other time. But again, Mr. Faisal Siraj, you have 30 seconds to respond to a question, and then Amna Khan. And then I've stolen 1 minute to sum it up.
Yeah, just to last point on the small states and their navigation ability. I think we need to compartmentalize their economic aspiration versus their commitment to sovereignty. So when it comes to economic issues, I think by design they're small. So I think their navigation power agility is much more better. So I'm personally less worried about that. But when it comes to sovereignty issue, I think that's where the bigger concerns, or at least the perceived bigger concerns are, and that's where I think they need to rely on international mechanisms. Thank you.
Amna, you have the last 30 seconds before I let the audience go.
Okay, I think so already all the questions have been answered, but I will just want to add to the last question, which he asked that right now we are uncomfortable with India, and in future maybe we'll be uncomfortable with China. So I think you're like IR student, so you must know that there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. So when you have like foreign policy, and when you formulate the foreign policy, it's not black and white. We cannot say like this will be our friend, this is our not friend. So the things keep changing in foreign policy, and like we have to stay updated, we have to keep ourselves updated towards the international arena and international geopolitics going on. So we might be uncomfortable with China in future, and we are maybe at some point right now as well. So the thing is, you have to set your line straight. You should know like what are your interests, what are your national capacities, what are your national interests, what you want to
5
pursue,
seconds.
what you want to pursue in future, and what are your goals to achieve. So you set your foreign policy according to those goals. And
My interest is not to rush you down, but again, I cannot let 100 people be late for their lunch. So before letting go, in just a minute's time, and because it will not be doing justice to the session, let me sum it up in very broad strokes. Again, change is constant, and what we see is a change. Whether we like it or not, US's hegemony in terms of economic might, in terms of weapons and technology is being challenged, and it's being rapidly challenged by not only China, but also Russia to a certain extent, and also the middle tier countries are coming up, whether it's Japan, South Korea, Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey, or even for that matter, India. And within this, again, in South Asia is the cockpit for this change. How we navigate this change as South Asian countries, or as Bangladesh, navigating between India, China, and the US by keeping our national interests is probably existential question for us, and that requires our best possible minds to focus on this. With this, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and apologies if I have rushed you because I was also constrained for time. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Now I'm requesting all the panelists to come forward for a group photo. Please come forward for a group photo, please. After the photo session, please. Thanks to all. We'll resume our session sharp at 3 p.m. I repeat, we will resume our session at 3 p.m. Please join us at the Oasis for lunch. Thank you.